Welcome to the second part of our talk with Klaudia and Nidžara about the fortress of Europe and the inhumane border regime set up by the EU institutions.
We love the fact that you love freedom.
In the report Repackaging Imperialism, the EU-IOM border regime in the Balkans, which you wrote together with other colleagues, you explain how the EU accession process is instrumentalized by the EU. It's used as a pretext to make countries like Bosnia, that is, countries that want to be part of the community, to militarize and privatize their borders in order to contain migration. Another example is of Georgia, whose citizens were offered free travel to EU countries as long as Georgian authorities applied the EU policies for migration. You name this a carrot and stick approach. How these constraints work in reality, and what do they mean for the power dynamic between the regions?
In reality, it works in a way that everything that is happening, let's say in Bosnia, everything that is relevant for citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina, like economic crisis, like mass brain drain that we have from this country, like huge corruption, like strengthening of mafia style criminal organizations in the region, but also simple things like underdeveloped infrastructure, everything with what is happening with our environment and these foreign investments that are endangering our lives is less important than what EU finds is important for the EU. So not for people of the region and countries of the region, but rather for the EU. In this way, they direct the way how we move and what we do. In order to do that, they cooperate with, and I have to say, corrupt politicians who are forever using this promise of the EU to stay in power, and they are listening to what EU wants them to do, and as long as they listen, the EU will support them to stay in their offices. So even though these countries do have elections, they do different things, there is no chance to change anything. The best probably example beside Bosnia, which has, as I said, special status, so it's maybe not the best example, is Serbia. Where you have a person that is described by many academics, also media, and a big part of the people who are living in Serbia as autocrat, Aleksandar Vučić, the president of that country, who is there for years, who was part also of Milošević government, a man who at the end ended his life in detention, indicted for war crimes that were committed in the Balkans, actually in former Yugoslavia at the beginning of the 90s. However, Vučić is still the president. Beside all the protests that we are seeing, almost every month you have protests on the streets of Serbia, in Belgrade, but also in many other cities. Beside all the issues that Vučić has, like lack of freedom, pressure on the media, pressure on civil society, European Union finds him as one of the best partners in every possible situation. So like recently, we witnessed how representative of German government and French government came to Serbia in the middle of ongoing protests of citizens who are demanding different policies toward the environment protection, but also some other issues that exist in Serbia. But practically arrival of high-ranking politicians from France and Germany sent a very clear message to citizens in Serbia that they do support the government and they do not support citizens of that country. So even though EU is promising and talking about democracy all this time, they are denying the basics of democracy, which is rule of the people. And that is very dangerous, and that puts the Balkan in a situation that we as the region, we will be forever slaves of the West and used in different ways for the European Union and other Western powers to achieve the goals they have, while everything we want and the life we deserve, like everybody else, is practically denied. The result is brain drain. However, unlike in the case of migrants coming from countries, non-white people, European Union and the West is more open for us because of the color of the skin. But also when I say that they are more open to the Balkans, usually it's people who can be employed in low-paid job or not that high paid jobs, so it's a care, I don't know, it's construction and similar kinds of jobs that people from the Balkans are leaving their countries, living completely empty cities and villages. Some people are like moving out with the entire families, just abandoning life here, and then everybody is losing, except the EU that always gains something.
Are the small states always the victim of the rich countries in Europe? Because hearing you talking about slaves in Europe and how entire populations are turned into instruments of the rich countries in Europe, there is also this tendency to overgeneralize or to oversimplify and say nation states in the Balkans or in the south of Europe are always the victims. So my question, or our question, is are these countries always the victim, or do they have a space for negotiating with the big powers in Europe? And we are thinking, for example, of Morocco, which also through the issue of managing migratory flows, managed to obtain from the Spanish government, of course with the allowance of the United States, a legitimation of its own imperialist interest in Western Sahara. And so the question is, what is the position of the African Union regarding the European Commission's proposal to implement detention centers on African soil? And what is this relation between the ruling class of a southern European country or an African country and the interest of the big capital and rich countries in Europe?
And maybe start with a good example I have been following for the last years, which is another country, Lebanon, that is strategically very important for the European Union since the war in Syria broke out, but even before. And now with what is going on with the genocide in Gaza, even more. So Lebanon has been a completely corrupted system since the beginning of the 2000s, and we have seen this in the peak of the bank system completely collapsing, and very high-ranking, politicians, but also business people, like literally stealing the cash out of the banks and leaving the country. These are countries where the UN, imposed the biggest funding for Syrian refugees after the war. So there were millions and billions of dollars that have been fueled into Lebanon to basically shield off and hold people in Lebanon and basically provide for Syrian refugees. While we have seen the system completely collapsing, and I can remind you on the port explosion in Lebanon, but in Beirut, but we can go further. So. And now we are even seeing that other companies like ICMPD slowly getting into Lebanon. For example, they have been getting a contract some years ago to provide the full security at the airport in Lebanon. Although we know that the system is completely collapsing in the country, and there's actually a parallel system that is built up by a militia, which is Hezbollah in the country. But still, it's one of the main partners for the European Union. The same goes for Egypt. And you have been mentioning Morocco already as an example. But Nidžara, I'm happy if you want to add to that as well from your perspective.
No, just to say, I'm not sure, if the states are victims. I'm not sure I would use that word at all. But I see that citizens are in a very bad position, people, and I'm not sure that we will have such a complicated political system as we have in Bosnia. Like we have 3 presidents, we have 168 or even more ministers, we have 3 levels of government, we have peace agreement, we have international community, and or that we will have Alexander Vučić, or that we will have many other things that are happening like in Montenegro without EU and cooperation of the political parties with the EU. I'm not sure that these people will still be in power if it is not this kind of game. So I don't know how to explain this relation, but somebody is definitely benefiting from all this, but it's definitely are not people from the region. I'm not sure even people in EU.
I have to tell you that earlier this year, the entire Romanian media boiled with fury at the Austrian government, which once more opposed Romania's and Bulgaria's accession into the Schengen area. Well, the whole issue was treated by the Austrian part as a security issue. Nobody discussed what was actually at the stake. No serious article or analysis was ever published. But when Romania and Bulgaria were given access to the so-called aerial and maritime Schengen in April 2024, the whole media in Romania celebrated the event. Very recently, the AfD extreme right party won in Thuringia, right, in Germany, on which occasion the leader of the party gave a fascist speech on migration. And this is the unfortunate direction of the most European countries. Now, from what you see, is the rise of the extreme right directly translated into policies related to migration?
I mean, I can start with the question of the Schengen accession of Romania and Bulgaria. I think, from my perspective, right, this happened like beginning of the year. This narrative was used by the conservative, but also by the far right, to start their, election campaign for the European elections. I think at that point they used this narrative to show the population in Austria that they are still trying to implement, border regimes, that they're still trying to show these countries that they have to close the borders, because then people will basically, we have the flood of people coming to Austria if these countries are not closing the borders and not doing their thing right. It's always like this narrative of we have to teach how you have to close your borders in order for us to be safe. So in my opinion, this kind of very populist way also of suddenly discussing this very openly, that Austria holds their vote, was used because elections were coming up, not only European elections, but also national elections in Austria. And not so many people have been focusing on that. On the ground, it was very interesting, because one of the arguments that was used is that Bulgaria and Romania are not applying to return agreements, which was really like a false information that was given by the Austrian government. In fact, if you look at the numbers, I think with Bulgaria they issued a number of like Austria had 2,500 requests of returns, and actually most of them were fulfilled. So this is a very good example of, you put the narrative out there, which is completely wrong, and you test it and you see if it works or not. And in this case, it was very successful for the Austrian government on a European level to show that we still have power and we can still implement this power. And this translates also now to the far right, that will definitely gain at the elections in September, if not gain actually a majority vote.
But the problem with far right in general in Europe at this moment, in European Union especially, is that I don't see that there is, at least that there is a loud opposition to it. It's non-visible. I am aware there are left parties, that there are people who are not supporting far-right ideas, but it's really not enough loud, not enough visible, at least not for us who are on the other side of the EU borders. And these ideas, what looks like for us, these ultra-right ideas are spreading like disease, because that's what fascism is. It's kind of like disease that spreads very easily, and it's very hard to stop it. And it reflects on migration policies as well, or on many other issues in life. And I'm really kind of like skeptical about directions of the general where all of us are going. I'm not sure how much stronger they can be in the near future, because they are already very strong, even in Austria, and we can see that like every day in the policies that are implemented in all the countries in the West, not only toward migrants, but also citizens of these countries. I mean, the best example is what is happening with Palestine, and how much repression and how much oppression is used against people who are ready to see what is obvious, that genocide is being committed against Palestinians in one part of the world, and to see who is to be blamed for that. And but that's not the only issue that makes me feel almost afraid of the near future.
One closing question, which looks into the future a bit, or tries to look into the future. Are there any effective means, political instruments at hand to change this hellish border regime? What does the near future look like, in your opinion? So this is one question, and a secondary one would be: migration is one of the most important elements in human and social development. So migration is part of the human and of the life of the society. How should the migration infrastructure be used systemically, in your opinion, for the benefit of the people? Is there anything in near future in light for you that can lead to a change?
In my opinion, what can lead to a change is us. So places like this that you created, places where we can talk about the issues, us as a people who are connecting among each other, talking about these things and trying to find a way out of this situation together. We need to kind of like occupy spaces and to fight these far-right policies that exist, to fight this ridiculous idea about managing migrations, and to fight for something that we believe in. We have to agree, and that's why we need these spaces where we can talk about what do we want to live together, and how does the world and our lives should look like in the future. And then based on that mutual agreement, we have to put much more effort than we are putting now into building a future that will be different from what the current leaders are creating and promising to us. In this sense, I really see a need of forming again a strong anti-fascist movement that will exist across the borders, and that movement demands a different world where borders and this whole migration management system, border management system, will be abolished. And then we can start thinking about the better future. You can maybe say that this way of thinking is utopian, and maybe it is, but without utopia, without dreams, without hopes, there is no way we can build anything new and anything different. So yeah, that's my way of thinking. Let's get together, let's organize, let's dream, and let's try to find a way out of this very dark future that current political elites created for us.
And what I can add to that is that a strong anti-fascist movement needs to include a strong anti-war position. And as someone who has been politically active in the heart of Fortress Europe, as we always say it in Austria, we have been seeing how the so-called left has been divided, not only by questions on the war in Ukraine, but also on the current genocide happening in Palestine. And it's devastating to see that the left cannot handle these positions. And in my perspective, the main issue was that there was no strong position against war in general. And I think here we can learn a lot from people who have been fleeing and coming from regions where they have been organizing under these conditions for so many years. And that's why I think this is an opportunity, not only creating these spaces between us, but also creating spaces to think and resist against this logic of war and exploitation. Yeah.
With this conclusion, I want to thank you both for the discussion and for your thorough analysis.
Thank you very much for giving us a space and possibility to talk about these very important issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much.